Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we're looking at the top 10 decks for the European International Championships, taking place on April 26th to the 28th. So just a couple of weeks now before we get into this big tournament, and it's really going to run down the top decks in Standard. We've had the team-up meta for a long time. We've already had the EUIC, which has been the same meta game, so it's more developed for EU, so we've had a lot of time to collate some results from a bunch of regionals and special events. So we really are seeing the cream of the crop of the best decks in Standard after a few months. So let's jump straight into it. You can keep an eye on the ranking of these decks as well from the community, so you're not just taking my word for it. You can also see what were the most voted for decks by people on Facebook. I did this poll just yesterday. So you can definitely check this out and still vote for your own favorites if you want to, just for your own sake. But yeah, you can keep a look at how the community rank these compared to my own opinion slash the amount of points these decks have achieved. That's pretty much how I've tried to make this list. It's a combination of my own thoughts around also frequent results and just the results throughout the entire team up meta. So let's jump straight into it. In at number 10, we have Beast Box, kind of like a new entry. This deck really popped up in Denver with a few notable players making some top 2 placements with the deck. Pretty interesting build. It's trying to capitalize on its 2 type coverages of Psychic and Fighting to give it some good matchups here and there. You also have good tankability with the Stack Attacker trying to reduce damage done to your Ultra Beast. That's why Passimian is basically a free matchup for you, because your Nagas are so tanky and Tapu Koko does nothing when you have 2 stackers on board. You're trying to have good Zoroark and Zapdos matchups. That's pretty much the biggest thing here, as well as Pikachu, really, because you're trying to have tanky 1-energy Nagas that can just get max potioned and ace rolled up to undo Zapdos pressure, and you're trying to use Buzzwole against the fighting weak stuff, obviously. You have a couple awkward matchups here and there. You really don't want to see Malamar. Your entire deck is weak to Psychic outside of stackers, but Stack Attackers only do 120, which isn't enough for Giratinas, so that's pretty awkward. You also don't really want to see Blacephalon. You're both GX heavy focused decks, but a lot of your deck won't work because you can't put down your stackers. You have to wait for B-String activation for your Buzzwoles and whatnot, so it feels like they'll have the momentum against you. Celosaurus feels a little bit awkward, as does Stall, so bear those things in mind. You can beat Stall if you use your Naganadel GX attack to set both of you to 3 prize cards and then maybe push through with B-Strings. That's probably the only real way I see you beating stalling decks. And that might be possible, so do bear that in mind. It may end up being a close matchup. I haven't tested it enough because Beast Box is such a fresh deck. I imagine that's your main approach. You go for Naganadel GX attack into B-Strings galore. It's whether a stalling deck will, be able to gust up some chunky things and deny this Naga its GX attack in the first place with Plumeria spam and whatnot. So do bear that in mind. Let's jump to the list. This is literally Shemansky's, I think, he came like 18th place in Denver, I think it was. His 60 cards. I played around with it a little bit. I tried to change a few cards here and there. There are some counterintuitive cards like Underground Expedition, which you don't really see in any other deck. There's also a heavy focus on Bill's Analysis, which allows you to pick out B-Strings and Max Potions, which is actually a pretty nice card in the deck, to be honest. But it really is just completely focused on the Ultra Beast. No draw support at all. No Oranguru, no Lele. Nothing like that. No Jirachis. It's all just Ultra Beast. That's the biggest reason I have this only at number 10. Because in theory, this deck can beat a lot of things in the meta right now. And its matchup spread looks really strong. It's just, you don't draw very well a lot of the time. You're playing some pretty questionable supporter cards. There's no Lillian here at all. In fact, it's favoring things like 1 copy of Judge, 1 Tantalizer, 1 Underground Expedition even. And these are things that are very surprising to see in the list. So when I played around with it and had a few tinkers, it wasn't the most consistent of decks. That's kind of why I have it low on the list. But if you can get this build right and play around with the 60, I know Alex is still very focused on his build, and I think he literally changed 1 card in a recent cup, and I think he got 2nd with it. So he's very happy that this 60 is optimal. So if you want to start here and get testing with it and see if you like any individual changes here and there, but this is the core that he is really a big fan of. So an interesting build for sure. Beast Box coming in with some type coverage and tankability for basically the top 3 decks in the format right now. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. In at number 9, we have Passimian Tapu Koko. It's one of these that wasn't actually voted for by many people at all, ranked 21st. You'll notice on the community review that I showed earlier in one of the opening slides, I actually split up every single archetype, so I basically had a tick box for Zoroark Cario as well as Zoroark like Weavile, for example. So these rankings aren't just exactly individual archetypes, whereas in this top 10 list, they'll be bunched up together. So I'll have Zoroark all in one slide. So the ranking, isn't the full story, but it will give you, a good indication of how many people are thinking about playing this deck and how many people consider it a top 10 deck, really. So not many people voting for Passimian overall, but in theory, again, its matchup spread is really strong. Having reasonable Zoroark, Zapdos, and Mali matchups, thanks to, again, type coverage being the name of the game here. Passimian being able to one-shot Zoroarks with that full board, especially if they don't get their muck down or if you can deal with muck. You have your power huddle Passimians. Even if there is a muck down, you can choice band and get there with the full bench. Against Zapdos, you're trying to go for Electro Power Koko spam, maybe trap some Zapdos here and there. And against Malamar, they have to be very, very disciplined with their board state. Otherwise, you can get, completely wrecked by the spreads. So those are the matchups you're trying to see. Pikarom surprisingly close, especially if they are Thunder Buddies, where they sort of start off with a Zapdos pressure, then move into late Pikaroms, because it's hard for you to navigate early Koko spreads. Like, that's the game plan that you set your stall out with when you see Zapdos stuff, but then having the board space open for the entire game for the Pikarom to sort of be dealt with. So making sure that you have enough space for the Passimian throughout the entire game is definitely something to bear in mind. So also Blacephalon could be close, QuagNag's close. You really don't want to see the likes of Stall, Celosaur, and Beastbox. Obviously, I mentioned how Beastbox can have really strong time against it with all the damage denial they have and the healing. Celosaur and Stall, again, Celosaur just has way too much healing, and sometimes they play energy removal, and Stall just has an easy amount of energy removal, and you easily can't get over the line on all that tanky stuff. So this is a pretty quick build of my Passimian. I played this at a cup like earlier in the months, and haven't really changed the build too much. I still think it's reasonable. I like having the Zeb Striker backup to still sprint against Muck, so I'm not fully reliant on Jirachi, but still having a mini package in there to help you dig out some like choice bands and ball search cards and whatnot. So this is the build that I've sort of been tinkering around with. I still really like it. I still think it's a reasonable deck. You do just completely fall to Stall and Celosaur, which are a couple decks on the radar after Denver, though. So that's kind of the biggest reason why I can't put Passimian far too much up the list. So those are the things you're trying to dodge, but you can definitely pick up some big wins against the likes of Zapdos and Zoro if you get your head around this deck. So definitely one to bear in mind. In number 8, we do have Celosaur. It had a big finish in Denver. That's kind of the reason why I've pushed it up here, because it's definitely gone far in the tournament. You have some pretty funny favourables in QuagNag and Passimian. That just sort of happens naturally. You're not playing Celosaur for those good matchups. They're just sort of there. You also like seeing Zoroark and Zapdos. Those are much more relevant ones. Not really happy to see Pikarom. That's kind of close, as is Malamar. And you're definitely trying to dodge Stall, because you basically can't have enough damage output because you have too much reliance on DCE. Your attack costs are too heavy, even though you could, in theory, GX attack energies back into your deck. If they early Plumeria spam, like, you'll never get towards that GX attack for the reload, and your damage output is just not that strong against them, especially when they can just sit Hoopas in your face, which is really awkward. And Blacephalon, of course, hits for weakness. There has been some anecdotal evidence that Celosaur can beat the Blacephalon. I think it happened in Denver on the way in like day 2 Swiss. I think the top 4 list was able to beat a Blacephalon 2-0, but it would definitely be unexpected. I'd be very, very surprised if Blacephalon lost. If you had like 10, 15 games against Celosaur, you're always going to be coming out on top. Maybe 1 or 2 games you drop, but that's really about it. I feel like the Celosaur player should not be expecting to go into Blacephalon and going to look to win. The real big innovation from the Denver list was going towards a builds analysis route of its own and then adding in the mixed herbs, kind of overtaking the Gardenia. I'm still playing 2 copies of Gardenia in my build, so this is kind of like a hybrid between my previous list that I've played at like challenges and stuff and also the Denver builds, because I'm still a big fan of Pokenav. I still think the DC finding potential that you have of Pokenav is really good. It actually has minor synergy with Bill as well, because it's A, thinning for Bill in the first case scenario, and B, you get some knowledge of your top 7 cards. You get to see the first 3. So it can give Bill some synergy as well, so something to bear in mind. So it's kind of like a hybridized build of Denver's. Basically, I've cut the 3 potions that was played in Denver. I still don't think potions a reliable enough card to have in the deck. I don't think it's high enough impact. I think the mixed herbs and builds analysis is very strong and smart. I also like the mini adventure bag package, and I've tried to throw that into this build. So this is more hybridized than the Denver 60 overall, but I did like a few big shouts, like having 4 Guzmas going down the builds analysis route. I did really enjoy that overall, and I can definitely see how that was helpful. So pretty nice build of Venusaur there. Just try and dodge those clowns and stall, and you should be okay. On to number 7, QuagNag. Obviously, this holds true in my heart. I love playing this archetype. It's had a decent number of votes, seeing as though it got a top 16 placement in Denver with Ross Cawthon, one of the legends of the game. And it has some massive favourables. I think this has one of the best matchup spreads of any deck, because I think Stall's a good deck to just be able to breeze through. Having a nice Malamar and Blacephalon is also really, really nice. I like those favourables a lot. You also just pick up a randomly nice Passimian, because you can just try and GX attack for game against them really easily after a Volcanion spread. You also have some close matchups. Beastbox seems close. Pikarom and Zapdos are close matchups. You're hoping that 120 hit points and 130 hit points from the Quag and the Nag respectively are awkward for Zapdos. Maybe force some GXs into play. Against Pikarom, similar story really. But at the same time, it's more sort of based on your Onyx and how you can cycle it against Pikarom. I guess that's really the main thing that you have to bear in mind. You don't really like seeing Zoroark too much, especially because they're more likely to be playing Blower than pretty much any other deck right now in the sort of top 10. Blower really isn't expected to be in any list except for Zoroark, so that's the real thing you're worried about now that you are much more baton-based. So that's the real fear there. And another unfavourable is Venusaur. It's basically unwillable. That's the thing that you really don't want to see. Let's have a quick look at Cawthon's list. I've again tested this on stream recently. I at first saw the list and was like, where are the Guzmas? Put them in. Then I went back to his list and thought, yeah, the Sightseer looks strange, the One Judge looks strange, but after playtesting it a decent amount, you just have to get your head around the list and play it as it is. And I really love the 4 Baton. I love 3 Stretcher. The thick Quag ends up being like your main attacker throughout this game with this sort of build. And Onyx comes in to swing against some very popular GXs out there. The Zoroarks, the Zeraoras, the Pikaroms. So I actually really love his 60. And I don't think I would be changing a card if you're going to be playing it in the EUIC. I think it's the perfect 60, to be honest. The Sightseer is the most flexible card in my book, followed by the Judge. The Countercatcher may even be a 2 copy in the deck rather than like a 1 and a Guzma, but that could also be reasonable. But overall, if I was cutting Sightseer and Judge, they would just be for other supporter cards, like Erika's, for example. Like, those are the only things I'm thinking about changing in the build. Everything else looks really good. Even the Acrobikes, I like a high count as well, just so that you don't miss your Quagsires, because you're trying to chain them a lot and also gives you extra, you know, discard opportunities for water energies. So I really do like his 60. I think it's very strong, and QuagNag has some good scalps they can claim. On to number 6, we have Hoopa Regigigas Stall, or Wacky Smacky, or whatever you want to call it. It has a nice favourable against Venusaur. It likes seeing Zoroark, which is always very good. As long as it's not Zoro Control, you're happy. Beastbox is reasonable. I've put it as favourable here, but I need to test that matchup a little bit more. I probably should have put that in a close matchup, to be honest, because as long as you can deny the Naganadel getting them into Beast Ring range, you should be okay. You don't really want to see the QuagNags. Your very favourable should be Passimian instead of very unfavourable. This should be up here. So that's a small error from me. But yeah, Passimian should be very, very favourable, not unfavourable at all. But you are kind of worried about Malamar and Pikarom. They might have enough gas to get through you. Malamar is much easier if there is a Vileplume in your list, but if there isn't, it should be very difficult, especially if they use their Giratinas to knock out their own Marshadows. That's going to be very awkward for you. So Hoopa Regigigas is basically trying to farm a good amount of Zoroarks and a few other decks here and there. Also, it's reasonable against Zapdos a lot of the time. I would say that against Zapdos and Blacephalon, it can be close. The main reason I kept this as a close matchup is if Zapdos is playing Zeraora, it definitely becomes a close matchup. So if it's kind of like the Zapdos Jolteon, that's the sort of close one. If you're up against Zapdos Beasts and like Zapdos Lycanroc without Zeraora, it may be much easier for you. So there's a good amount of Zapdos variants and a good amount of Zoroark variants that you want to hit. Just trying to dodge enough Pikaroms and Malamars to have a good day. So I think that's something to bear in mind. Because it's done well at Denver, though, it is on the radar. There's more potential for people to be adding in, you know, like Persians and Orangaroos into their Zoroark base builds. More likely that Zapdos players are going to add in the Zoroark and stuff like that. So that's something to bear in mind. This deck is currently on the radar. That's why I can't place it any higher, despite having some good results recently. Here's going to be the list. It's kind of just a simplified version of one of the top 8 builds. I've taken out the Larvitar, which was a Pikarom tech, admittedly. So if you want to go to that Larvitar double DCE, you can indeed. But I basically just stripped away some of those pieces just to add in, like, I think I added in like an extra Ball Search card, a Skull Grunt, and a few other like typical control cards, basically, is all I did. So it's just a simple shell of a store build, but if you want to go towards the top 8 list, you definitely can go for that as well. In at number 5, we have Malamar. A decent number of votes for Ultra Necrozma, much less so for Spread and Mally, so we'll be focusing mostly on the Ultra build. I think that's definitely the one that's shown itself to be the strongest overall. It likes facing the Beast Box. That's a nice new matchup that it picks up. Also quite happy to face Stall and Celosaur in my book. And the main selling point for Malamar is that it's kind of a 50-50 deck against the top things in the format. This is placed at number 5, and against the top 4 decks, Blacephalon, Zoroark, Zapdos, and Pikarom, I feel like it's relatively close. I wouldn't call it more than a 60-40 in any direction, depending on what sort of builds each one of these lists are playing, but it feels like Ultra can sort of sway one of these matchups here and there. If they play less GXs, their Zapdos gets stronger, like you just have higher odds of like starting a non-GX, and if you want to have a better Zapdos, you can add in the Ditto. If you want to have a better Zoroark, you can add in Choice Bands. For Pikarom, you can add in the Marshadow GX. For Blacephalon, you can, again, Choice Band's a really helpful card as well. So if you want to go down those routes, you can improve matchups here and there and basically cherry pick which ones you want above a 50-50. But that's basically it. This deck is trying to have 50-50s across the board and just try and pilot it to success. That's the whole idea behind this build. For unfavorables, QuagNag and Passimian, I mean, these aren't really popular unfavorable decks, so Malamar won't really ever go into a tournament trying to dodge and weave. It's more just trying to play its game plan to the best of its ability. And the big downside of Mally really is that it doesn't have the same natural consistency of the likes of a Zoroark and the likes of a Zapdos because they are Jirachi based. Obviously, Malamar normally plays one copy, but it's a lot less than these other decks. So you're just hoping that Malamar has the consistency to see you through. And taking no auto losses is really, really nice. I think dodging QuagNag is reasonable. Like, you're not going to face 3 QuagNags at the EUIC. I'd be surprised if anyone has that sort of day. So it's not a bad couple of unfavorables to take there. This is my Ultra Mally build. I literally profiled this just the other day, and it hasn't changed since then. Notably, Tord recently won the Tablemont Invitational with a list that played no Marshadow but double Lele. Playing no Let Loose does make you a little bit weaker against Stall. But double Lele is definitely something to bear in mind, just for extra consistency. So you can also compare this list to Tord's most recent winning one as well, so that's something to bear in mind. But a pretty simple, straightforward list that I'm demonstrating here that I think is pretty solid. I've been testing this for a reasonable amount of time. More Choice Band is something I'm trying to work in, but at the moment I'm just sticking with 4 Cynthia, 4 Lily, and the Erica, because I don't trust Ultra Malamar to draw well enough on its own. I'm wanting to make sure I never find myself in a supporter drought situation, so that's the way I'm trying to build it. In at number 4, we have Blacephalon. It loves seeing the Rise of Celosaur. That's a deck that you can just tick off your list pretty easily. It's also pretty happy against most Zoroark builds. I think it's only really Zoroark Weavile that you're very upset about facing. And Weavile's really been on the down low. It feels like the pure Zoroark, the Zoro Control, and the Zoroark Cario are easily the 3 most popular Zoroark variants recently. So Blacephalon can try and farm them relatively comfortably. Also picks up a nice matchup in Beast Box just because you're, more consistently aggressive. You can also have those turns with Naganadel finding like Beast Energy and whatnot to punish Buzzwolves, etc. That can be something to bear in mind, seeing as though they probably won't be putting down their stack attackers against you, obviously, because Blacephalon can clean them up too easily. And again, this is kind of like a 50-50-ish deck. You like seeing Malamar. You have answers to Stall because you are playing like E-switches and whatnot, and you have Let Loose at your side, so these are things you can try and do. Passimian's surprisingly close just because you can attack with Nags to keep pressure on. Trying to find like Beast Rings and limiting your bench is something that's pretty interesting. Zapdos can be close if you can get your Muck down, and obviously you're playing the Treasure build to try and get early Grimers and whatnot alongside Ditto. You don't really want to see Pikarom too much. They can play around Beast Ring relatively comfortably at times, so that's something you don't want to see. And QuagNag becomes a new unfavorable. So overall, Blacephalon's relatively safe. I don't think it's a bad play at all. And Zach Lesage has proven over and over again in this meta why it's still a strong deck. And that's pretty much where this build takes us. It's very similar to a lot of the recent builds that we've seen Zach been playing. Again, just a pretty straightforward baseline. I've had builds that have just had 1 Marshadow and 4th Treasure. That gives you higher odds of getting those Grimers down turn 1. Right now I'm on the thin Naga line. You can go for the 3-4 build or the 4-4 build. I know Zach's sort of been playing around with both options, so that's something to bear in mind. But at the moment, I'm just going high on the ball search. I still like having 3 stadiums total because bumping shrines is still very viable in my book, and trying to win out Stadium War at some point in the game is also going to be viable as well for you. So I think I really like the high stadium count to sort of counteract the fact that you're physically playing just the 3-3 Naga. But yeah, overall, that's my Blown build. I think it's pretty strong overall, and there aren't too many bad matchups for you. Just dodge the Quagsires that some people might be risking on the weekend. Zoroark in 3rd place feels very strange for me. It wasn't even voted the most. It was actually voted 4th highest. That is to be said, though, that there are so many different builds of Zoroark. If you lump in all these different builds together, it has a very high number of votes because there's a lot of people saying Zoroark's the best, Zoro Control, Zoro Weavile, Zoro Cario. Basically, the jury's out with this deck. We know that there are so many different variations for this build. It feels like the straight Zoroark has been gaining a lot of popularity, where you now played the Twilight Eyes alongside Bloodthirsty Eyes, so you just have the 3-3 Lycanroc, giving you a few more spaces to maybe add in more Ball Search, not Brick so much. Maybe you can fit in 2-2 Muck if you want to as well. We've seen that incorporated with Zoro Control. So there's a lot of different avenues really for Zoroark to take right now. The Lucario is definitely trying to solidify Mirror as well as Pikarom matchups. Weavile could start coming in if you're trying to improve your Clown matchup and Ultra Malamar matchup, which I think is very reasonable as of late, because obviously with Zoro Control recently winning, it might indicate that more people will work towards these sorts of one-hit KO based decks, like Ultramali and like Blowns, because they can do a lot better against Zoro Control. So adding in Weavile could be, a nice mirror card as well as giving you outs against those sorts of archetypes. So something to bear in mind. The Zoroark matchup spread is pretty close in my book. I think you don't mind seeing QuagNag as long as you can play around Onyx here and there. And especially if you do play Field Blower, you can get rid of Batons, which seem to be very, very critical for them, because they play 4 copies of that just to chain their attacks most of the time. If you can knock out Onyx whilst also blurring a Baton, it could be lights out for them a lot of the time. And also they just have so much bricking potential, and you can do lots of Lycanroc shenanigans. Close matchups is going to be Malamar, Zapdos, and Pikarom. Zapdos is pretty much dictated by how early you can get your Muck down, if at all. And Pikarom is more about when you can get your fighting Pokemon up and running, if at all. If you can find your counter gain combos alongside like Mallow and whatnot, or if you can get into Lucario. Malamar always going to be close. There's only so much you can deny, and Ultra can get one-hit KOs, so just keeping them honest. And especially like the Weavile build is probably more favorable. The Lucario build is probably unfavorable. So I've split it down the middle just because there are so many different variants of Zoroark right now that we can go towards. For unfavorables, I think almost all of them don't want to see Blacephalon. Only really Zoro Control wants to see Stall. Celosaur seems ugly for most of them as well. Passimian seems relatively ugly, and Beast Box as well. The reason why we're seeing matchup spreads, when we go towards the top like 3 or 4 decks, you'll notice their matchup spreads look less sort of juicy, right? They look less like obvious to play, because the top 3 or 4 decks are the top 3 or 4 decks just because they're A, like the most consistent, and B, like the most strong inherently. So these like top 3 decks especially, they've taken the most points by like a long margin compared to everything else below it. So their matchup spreads don't look strong because people are trying to counter these decks just because they're so prevalent and they know that there will be these players in the room. So it's only natural that the spreads don't look all that pleasant. But the idea is Zoroark can carry you through. You can use your tech stage 1s in the right manner to improve matchups that you're expecting as well. So I'm just going to run through a quick number of the decks you could be building. This is the DGG's 60 card list. I believe I haven't changed a single thing. From their control list, you could think about going down a heavier control route, maybe adding in some mirror techs like Persian, Skullgrunt, and a few things here and there. But this is their simple shell, which is pretty interesting. Adding in the Champions Festival as a counter to Shrine is a very cool thing. There's going to be a Zoroark Cario. I've added in Psychic Grimers into most of these lists. The main reason I've done this is more so to make people think you're playing a 2-2 Muck. Seeing as though Denver has come about and you play... they played 2-2 Grimer with Treasures. If you play Psychic Grimers, you may make your opponent think that they have, or that you have different counts. Maybe they expect you to play double Muck if you're playing Psychic Grimer. So it's more of a fake out thing. If you want to just play the the Grimer that can knock out sleeping Jirachis with Chemical Breath, you can by all means go back to that. But that's the reason why I'm playing the Psychic Grimer, if anyone has any questions. It's more just so to sort of fake out your opponent so they don't know your actual list and how many counts you play. I'm playing Rainbow Energy in all these builds so you can't get your Muck trapped as easily, so you can Rainbow Acerola against certain archetypes. So that's something to bear in mind. Other than that, Field Blower's come into the list. I'm sort of on the fence about Field Blower. It's been mostly out of my list this season, but with more dumbbells coming into the builds of Zoroark, I feel like it becomes much more relevant, and it also helps you test the stadiums by like an extra count as well, so something to bear in mind. So yeah, pretty reasonable and straightforward Zoroark Kare build there. This is the Zoroark that's sort of pure, and I'm still playing the Psychic Grimer in this build. I think the only build that you will play the Dark Grimer is in a Weavile based build because you have the potential to Nanu. So again, yeah, Psychic Grimer for here, but play the one you want to. I'm playing Stadium Split as well, which is interesting, but I am playing the 4 basic and the Rainbow as like 5 outs. So that's sort of making up for the 1 Viridian, because I do like the versatility of 1 Devoured Field. It can help out against some random Zapdos players. It can help out against a few things. And when you play Mallow, playing like Split Stadiums feels a little bit less awkward. Usually you're playing these to bounce a lot of the time anyway, but I feel like when you're playing 5 energies total, and the 1 Forest seems reasonable to me. I'm still playing Kukui Band. I know this is sort of in and out of Zoroark lists as well, so that's something you can debate between yourselves. But yeah, again, a pretty simple, straightforward Zoroark list. And then the Zoroark Weavile. This is actually one of my teammates, Stephen Mao's list from way back in Cannes. I think the time may have come back in a pretty good circle for this deck, because having picked Weavile can really help you out against Blacephalon and Ultramally. And yeah, it feels like a just reasonable threat overall. I like it in the format right now. Still having, you know, the Mallow answers to counter gain to help out Lycanroc against Pikarom. I think this is probably the list that has the weakest Pikarom matchup of the bunch, so that's kind of the fear about playing this build. But you have a more, you know, you have more 50-50s here and there, because you're not going to just struggle against these other matchups that you may see 1 or 2 of throughout the day. So yeah, and the Dark Grimer for the potential of a Nanu being in the deck as well, because when you see this, the Weavile, that's got to be a sort of fake out for the opponent, that there may be the potential for a Nanu, so that's the only real consideration there. But again, it's more sort of faking out the opponent more than actually having the Nanu in our build, but it's something you can't do if you really want to re-establish Mucks against Zapdos players. It's something you can try and like burst out of nowhere, which could be pretty interesting, but from what I found, Nanu's more of a like 1 in 10 game type card than like a consistently helpful card throughout every match, so that's kind of how I see it, and I don't really want those types of cards in my builds personally. So again, just a simple baseline overall. You'll note that all of my Zoroarks don't tech for Mill or Stall, and they're not really teching for Zoro Control either. If you do want to tech for Zoro Control, you can go down, if you want to tech for the Mill and the Control, you can go down the sort of route of having Persian, Oranguru, Tantalizer, Switch, like those types of cards you can add into the build. And that could be something people are going for as well. But I've just tried to give you sort of vanilla baselines for all of these different builds. But it's up to you whether or not you want to tech for Stall. Pikachu&Zekrom gets my second place vote. The community think it's the best, with 81 votes for the Thunder Buddies build and 39 for the Turbo Pikarom. We've seen both of them be doing very well. Obviously, Turbo was like at the start of the season doing very well, and Andrew Mahone very recently played a quad order pad build in Denver to a very high, respectable finish. But also the Thunder Buddies base build by Gustavo Wada and Pablo Meza. They've also been tearing up events as well. I think you like seeing Stall, you like seeing Blacephalon, Zoroark, Mali, QuagNag, Celisor, Passimian. These are all close matchups. You wouldn't think intuitively that Passimian's close, but if there is the Thunder Buddies build, you sort of go Zapdos early, then drop a late like threat, and they may not have board space for Passimians and whatnot. So it's actually more favorable, I think, than it would be like a Zapdos matchup, which is something that feels really counterintuitive, but that's just what I found. The biggest time when Pikarom's much worse against Passimian is if you just happen to start the Pikarom itself, and they just Passimian smack you, and then they're very, very far ahead. So if it's Thunder Buddies-esque, I feel like you've got a close matchup against Passimian, but otherwise it'll be rough for you. Really bad if you're Turbo Rom. And unfavorables, Zapdos and Beast Box. I think the Zapdos really is only really unfavorable because you're trying to do the same thing they are, but they have more Jirachis and more Zapdos and whatnot, so they can remain non-GX for the entirety of the game. you have more potential to start GXs, and they always have the check of Tapu Koko. So I feel like it's only slightly unfavored, but unfavored nonetheless. And then Beast Box is literally a counter deck for Pikarom, so it's expected to be unfavorable in that case. So let's look at my list. I'm only going to show off Thunder Buddies. You can check out the Turbo ROM build as well that Mahone recently posted. Well, you can check it out on Limitless as always. But yeah, this is the Thunder Buddies build I've been playing around with recently. I think it's a really strong archetype, and it's not worried about too many decks in the format either, so I think it's just overall well-rounded and strong. I'm quite high on the Jirachi counts compared to most other Pikarom builds. Oftentimes you just see a 2 count. I'm playing 3 and a stretcher alongside the Zapdos, so I like having the option to go very non-GX in the matchups that you need to, basically in like Zapdos mirrors. But some other Zapdos builds alongside Pikarom are sort of more turbo focused, so that's something to bear in mind. Really, you're sacrificing a few switching cards here and there compared to regular Zapdos based builds to fit in like the E-switches and the Pikaroms, but the upside is you have natural like defense against stalling decks because you have Zeraora, you have Tapu Koko, Prism Star, and you have Jolteon to help out against Vileplume if that comes up, and you even have Let Loose in this build as well, so you have like the most outs to stall of the lightning stuff, so that's something to bear in mind. Overall, Pikarom very, very strong. My number 1 pick though is Zapdos Variants. They've achieved the most points in the team up meta. Obviously, they won the EUIC, so that's going to be really powerful, and we know the strength of this archetype, and there are many ways that you can play it. There's been a lot of variation with Zapdos recently. We've seen a recent rise in a Zapdos Lycanroc base build. There's always been the threat of Zapdos Ultra Beasts. There's also straight Zapdos Jirachi that we saw right at the beginning of this expansion. But the votes really lie towards the Zapdos Jolteon base builds. Those are the ones that are most anticipated and most people are respecting to be the strongest build of Zapdos recently. Adding in that Jolteon to help out mirror match situations helps you out against Vileplumes again for like stalling things. And Jolteon's just a good card, man. It's just a really powerful inherent in a vacuum card because it offers good early pressure, can set up knockouts with its early Swift Run. It's Jet Punch style attack. It has Swift Run available to force people to have Guzmas and whatnot on certain turns. So definitely a powerful GX attacker that they have open to them. For favorables, it's only really Pikarom that you really want to see, especially the Ultra Beast based build that really wants to see Pikarom, because also the Lycanroc build. The ones that have the fighting techs definitely want to see Pikarom. Even regular Zapdos Rachi versus Pikarom is slightly in your favor, I would say, because you can guarantee that you're going to be more non-GX throughout the entire series. Close matchups, a bunch of them. Zoroark is dictated by your use of Muck, and if you have defense against Muck, I personally implore the use of Zeb Striker, so that you still have defense when Muck is in play. Mali can be really awkward by only allowing you to use one Jirachi in fear of their GX attack, but if you can just tempo out on them with more pressure from Zapdos, you're likely to take the first prize in most situations, and you can usually just stay ahead for the majority of the game. Again, Zebra really helps out in that situation because it stays out of Sky Scorching range, unless you just have to go for a bunch of Giratinas, which is very difficult for you anyway, I would say. Blacephalon, again, getting around Muck is awkward, but that's really the only thing you're concerned about. Stall is a close matchup, only really if you're playing Zeraora. It's either very good or very bad, depending on if you add in the one tech card Zeraora, basically. QuagNag is close. Again, you have like tempo pressure on your side, but you are eventually sometimes in a bit of a problem when you do see the Magikarp and Warlord come down, so playing around that is crucial. Not benching too many things until you've already dealt with the Volcanion Prism Star is pretty much the thing you need to do there. Beast Box is inherently a counter deck once again, so Zapdos does not want to see that, nor does it really want to see Passimian, and Celosaur is possibly the hardest of the lot. If you are playing the Zeraora Jolteon Koko GX base build, the Zapdos Jolt, you actually have like the best chance of the lot, I would say. The Ultra Beast build really does suffer. The Lycanroc build is basically unusable because you can't really put your Lycanroc down in that matchup unless they for some reason go crazy overbenching things. So it feels like the Jolteon has the strongest matchup against Celosaur, but even then it feels unfavorable in my book. Let's have a look at some of these different variants. Zapdos is the archetype that I've tested the most in this expansion. I do really feel like it's the strongest in this meta. This is my Ultra Beast based build. I love playing double Zebra and double Stretcher to try and like recycle this guy. I'm trying to respect Zoroark as much as possible. It has come at the expense of only playing one shrine, which is a little bit awkward here and there when you're trying to push for the late game. It may make your matchup against the likes of Pikarom a little bit more difficult. It does put more pressure on the likes of your Sledgehammer turn. So that's something to bear in mind. But overall, I've even played renditions of this build that have had no shrine at times. One shrine feels a little bit strange, but I still like it as like counter stadium and whatnot. But I still like the use of Thunder Mountain. This protects you against opposing Absol players because you can manually attach and retreat out of your Jirachi and still attack with the Zapdos. So it's kind of like defense against Absol. Interestingly enough, I'm not playing Absol in my Zapdos builds, almost any of them, I don't think. I don't feel like it's all that worth it. It's the only real thing you can do in Mirror, though. So if you want to play a tech card for Mirror, Absol's pretty reasonable. It also slightly improves your Malamar, makes it less likely for them to attack you on turn 2. So if you feel that's relevant, you can add in the Absol. I'm just making space for double Zebra because I'm basically over-respecting Zoroark. But with this list, I'm actually very favoured against Zoroark. I don't think I've actually lost a series to Zoroark in tournament play with this deck, and that's across two cups and a special event, and I still haven't dropped a series to a Zoroark with this list, so that's an interesting stat for you there. I still feel like it's very strong in that matchup with the double Zebra and with the Ultra Beast support. Buzzwole, obviously a key turn, but Nihilego also can deny people, well, it punishes people for putting down Lycanroc, basically, which is really awesome for you. So yeah, strong list overall, one of my favourites. The Zapdos Lycanroc has been recently popping up in popularity, obviously having some fighting support and also giving you even more gusting to really capitalize on early pressure from Zapdos is pretty cool. You don't really have space for many other draw engine type cards, and when you don't have space for Zebra, I think Marshadow is a good option for you. You can try and wreck Zoroark hands early on in the game so that they can't have access to like multiple trades and muck all at once. So I think that's the nice sort of halfway house you can go for with this build, trying to have fighting tech Pokemon and also the option to early let loose to improve your Zoroark and Pikarom matchups, which is really cool. And then finally, we have the Zapdos Jolteon-based build. I think this is very similar, if not the same 60 that Pedro's recently been running in a bunch of tournaments and doing very well with it. So that's pretty much the shell we're looking at here. Very simplistic, very strong list that I think a lot of people will employ. Having the natural help against like Mill by having your own Zeraora and Koko Prism Star is very appealing. The Jolteon's always a very strong option, and having the Zapdos and the Stretchers at your side is really nice. I think that's the only card that I'm playing different from Pedro's actually, playing one Stretcher in the build, when I think he doesn't play Stretcher at all. So yeah, very solid 60. I really like the builds, and that's going to round out the top 10. What do you think about the top 10, guys? Obviously, the community's had their say as well. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. What are you thinking about playing for the EUIC? I'd love to hear it all. Outside the top 10, there may be a few decks that you were expecting to see on this list that didn't quite make it. There was the Lycanroc Lucario-based build, which also implores the sort of Jirachi-based engine and tries to Ace Aurora a bunch. I think with an influx of Blacephalon coming back in recent tournaments, it has made this much more of a risky play. Also, you don't really like seeing Malamar either. It was really sort of a meta cool deck for one of these US regionals when Kika played it to a top 8 finish. And it feels like he was able to dodge and weave Malamar and Clowns at the right time, but then they sort of started rising after that tournament. Zygarde Lycanroc won a recent special event. It was a sub 100 player tournament, but still something to bear in mind, and a few people might take inspiration from that list. Vicaray made, I believe it was top 64 from Jose Marrero in Denver, and he's got a pretty interesting take on that build as well, so it might be something to take a look at. Again, having Rayquaza and such a powerful energy accelerator at your side means that you're not worried about any of these stalling or milling variants. You can just power through them. And if there is going to be a movement away from attacking Zoroark builds, and obviously there's a lot less Weavile in the meta right now, Ray is oftentimes, not answered instantly. When people are cutting Kukuis, cutting Devoured Fields, cutting Choice Bands, it actually makes 180 pretty tanky against Zoroark, so that's something to bear in mind. Sylveon is sort of the subpar mill variant right now, but it's one that some people may be attached to, and it's always one to keep an eye out for in events. Alolan Eggs has seen play. Again, this did well at a recent special event, so it might inspire a few people to take it on and go for it. It's an archetype that's seen a lot of play in recent cups in the UK as well. Worth the mention there, I thought. And also Umbreon, Weavile. It's a deck that I actually quite like, and Weavile's coming back round, I think, in my books, to be a more popular answer. There's a lot of Zoroark going around. There's a lot of Malamar and Blacephalon sort of waiting in the wings that I feel like are much safer plays when you expect Mill to turn up to the EUIC. They seem to be better plays in my book, and Weavile likes coming up against that sort of stuff. You're a little bit weak against Zapdos, so you have to find a way around that, whether you try and use Rule of Evil to sort of get back in the prize race with some spreading cards, or if you try and have some denial pieces, like your own muck, for example, if you want to. Those are options that you have to consider for yourself. But overall, a nice rogue that I think was worth mentioning. So that's going to be it, guys. I've actually... I said see you in Melbourne, because obviously I've taken this and adapted it for the EUIC. So I'll be seeing you in Germany, not Melbourne. But yeah, these are my two couple picks that I think are going to be strong for the EUIC. If you want to have fun and still have some pretty nice matchups, QuagNag's the pick for me. But if you just want to turn up to the event and have a good chance of taking it all down, Thunder Buddies is my pick. Pikarom with the answers inherently for Milling Variants feels very, very strong. There aren't many matchups that you want to avoid. And I think overall that just makes for a very strong pick for the EUIC. So yeah, that's going to be it, guys. Hope you did enjoy. A couple of spelling errors and mistypings here and there. So I hope you appreciate that. But yeah, that's going to be it for the EUIC. That's pretty much it for Standard now as well. I'm going to start moving on to the new Unbroken Bonds meta as of this weekend. So yeah, hope you keep your eye out for those new videos. So hope you enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.